Jared was 17, black, and used to being overlooked. He blended in with the after-hours crowd like a ghost with a name tag, too tired to be noticed, too broke to disappear. Working late at the diner was nothing new. Neither was taking out the trash, but just as he rounded the corner with a torn bag dragging behind him, something stopped him cold. Near the dumpsters, someone was hunched low, rustler bags like they might hold something more than stale bread and wet cardboard. It wasn't just the movement that caught Jared's eye. It was the stillness after. Like whoever it was had given up on finding anything and was just going through the motions. Jared had seen it before. Being black in this city taught him early on where to look and when to keep his head down. But this was different. The man wasn't just hungry. He looked like he didn't even know what hunger was anymore, like he'd forgotten how the world worked. Old, thin, gray hair like smoke. He pulled a crust of bread from a ripped bag and stared at it like he wasn't sure if it was food or memory. Jared could have turned away, could have dropped the bag, wiped his hands, and walked home. His mom wouldn't have blamed him. She always said, "We can't help the world when the world ain't helping us." And she wasn't wrong. Rent was late, lights flickered, the fridge was quiet. But something about the way the man held that piece of bread like it might vanish if he blinked hit Jared in a place he didn't usually let anything touch. He went back inside, grabbed a takeout box from the stack of leftovers. Cold burger, fries going limp, nothing special, nothing someone would miss. He came back out and set the container down a few steps away. The man didn't react right away. Then his eyes found the box, and his hands followed like they were trying to remember what it meant to reach for something. "I don't remember the last time I ate," he said, voice rough like dry leaves. Jared didn't answer. He just watched him eat, slow and deliberate, like each bite had to fight its way down. After a while, he asked, "You got anywhere to go?" The man didn't say yes or no. He just paused like the question had come from a world he no longer belonged to. Then, "I don't think so." "What's your name?" Another pause. "Henry," the man said finally. "I think." Jared didn't know what to do with that. He'd never met someone who didn't know their own name, didn't know how to forget someone like that either. Henry looked up, eyes cloudy but searching. "There was an accident or something. I try to remember, but most of it's gone. It comes and goes." Jared didn't press. He didn't need details. He understood what it felt like to live in the in-between, to move through a world that didn't stop for you. And maybe that's why he couldn't walk away. "My place is close," he said. "You can crash there tonight. We don't got much, but it's warm." Henry didn't speak, didn't smile, but he didn't say no. They walked in silence. Jared kept his pace slow, even, like if he moved too fast, the moment might break. He didn't know what his mom would say. Probably nothing nice. She didn't let people in easy. Not after everything. Not with the way life had tried to take everything from them and almost succeeded. But something told him this couldn't be ignored. When they reached the apartment, Jared stood at the door, key in hand, second-guessing everything. Then he unlocked it. Inside, his mom was folding laundry, tired as always. She looked up, saw Henry behind him, then looked at Jared. Didn't ask. "This is Henry," Jared said. "He didn't have anywhere to go." She paused, then turned, opened the cabinet, and pulled down another bowl. "I made extra," she said. And just like that, Henry had a place for the night. Jared didn't know if it was right or reckless. He just knew leaving Henry in that alley would have been worse. Henry didn't say much that first night. He ate slowly, like each spoonful needed permission. And when Jared's mom, Miss Denise to most people, handed him a blanket, he just nodded once and settled in quietly on the living room floor. Jared lay awake for a while on the couch, eyes fixed on the ceiling, his thoughts skipping between worry and some strange peace he couldn't name. He'd done something impulsive, maybe even foolish. But he hadn't regretted it. Not yet. Morning came colder than expected. Jared got dressed in silence, grabbed his backpack, and slung it over one shoulder. There was no breakfast. There rarely was. Just the same rhythm every day. Slip out early, hit the diner by sunrise, and hope for a calm shift. But as he reached the door, he heard footsteps behind him. Henry. The old man was already wearing his coat, oversized and worn, and stood just inside the doorway, eyes unsure, posture hesitant. "You don't have to follow me," Jared said, voice low. Henry didn't reply, just stepped forward. There was no demand in his presence, just quiet intention. Jared didn't push back. He just opened the door and let him come. The streets were still mostly asleep. Early sunlight scraped across rooftops, and the city hadn't yet started its daily grind. They walked in silence. Jared didn't know if Henry even had a plan, or if this was just another aimless step in a wandering life. But there was something different in how he moved. Slower than Jared, but steadier than the night before. Like something inside him had straightened out a little. Jared didn't ask questions. They just kept walking until the neon sign of the diner buzzed into view. He paused near the back door, hand on the knob, and turned to Henry. "You can wait outside," he said. "I'll bring you something later." Henry looked toward the front window, watching people filter in and out of the warmth inside. For a second, he didn't say anything. Then, "I can help." Jared blinked. "You don't have to." "I want to," Henry said. "I used to work. I think. I can do something. I don't want to just stand out here." There was something raw in the way he said it. Not desperation, not pride, just a need to matter. Before Jared could answer, the door swung open. Mr. Maxwell stepped out, squinting at the morning light, rubbing his hands together against the cold. He was in his 50s, gruff and straight-talking, not someone known for his patience. His eyes landed on Henry. Then Jared. "You picking up strays now?" Maxwell asked, not smiling. Jared straightened. "He's not a stray. This is Henry. He's got nowhere to go right now. I brought him home last night." Maxwell didn't answer right away. He looked Henry over, not with disgust, but with the practiced caution of a man who'd seen plenty. Then he grunted, shook his head, and said, "Long as he doesn't break anything, he can wipe tables." Jared blinked. "Wait, really?" Maxwell shot him a look. "I've hired worse. Not like I'm paying him." That was it. The door was open, literally and otherwise. Inside, the diner was already humming with life. Bacon sizzled, plates clinked, coffee poured. Henry stood near the counter like he was stepping into another world. Jared handed him a rag and pointed to a booth near the window. "Just wipe them down. That's it." Henry didn't ask questions. He just nodded and got to work. Jared kept expecting something to go wrong, that Henry would forget where he was, that he'd collapse, that Maxwell would bark something sharp and send him out. But none of that happened. Henry worked slow, but with focus. He wiped each table with care, moving like every surface needed to be done right. He didn't talk to anyone, didn't interrupt, just stayed out of the way, doing what he could. At first, no one noticed. He was just another old man in a place full of regulars and noise. But as the hours passed, heads began to turn. Customers stared. Some whispered. An older man in a plaid jacket stopped mid-bite and squinted at Henry as he passed by. "Hey," he muttered, "aren't you?" Henry paused, looked at him, then shook his head. "I don't know." The man watched him for another few seconds, then turned back to his meal. Jared had seen it, the flicker in Henry's eyes, the almost recognition, the way something stirred and then vanished. It was like watching someone try to catch a memory with hands that wouldn't close. The hours crawled. Henry never stopped, never sat down. Jared caught Maxwell watching him a couple times from the kitchen pass, his face unreadable. Not annoyed, just thinking. By the end of the shift, the diner emptied out, the noise faded, and the energy shifted. Jared was taking the trash out again, back into the same alley, same spot, and then he saw it. Lying near the dumpster, half soaked from a puddle, was a flyer. He picked it up, smoothed it out, black and white photo, a name, a familiar face. Missing, Henry Thompson, 3 months. If found, contact. Jared froze. His stomach flipped. He scanned the address at the bottom of the flyer. It wasn't a shelter. It wasn't a police department. It was a house, a real house, a home. He turned, bolted back through the door, flyer clenched tight in his fist. Henry was still wiping down a booth, moving slow, steady. Jared crossed the room in seconds, heart thudding. He held up the paper. "Henry." The man turned, eyes tired but alert. Jared said nothing, just held out the flyer. Henry took it, and the world shifted. Henry stared at the flyer like it had been pulled from somewhere inside him. His fingers gripped the edges, tightening until the paper crinkled. Jared waited, unsure whether to say anything, unsure if he should have waited until they were home, or if Henry would even understand what he was seeing. Then Henry whispered something, soft, almost too soft to catch. "I know this place." Jared blinked. "You do?" Henry didn't answer right away. His thumb ran slowly over the address printed at the bottom, over the faded photo of himself, clean shaven, younger, steadier. Something behind his eyes shifted, an urgency Jared hadn't seen before. "We have to go," Henry said. It wasn't a question. It wasn't a suggestion. It was sharp, sudden, and certain. Jared didn't ask how he knew. He didn't ask if Henry was sure. There was no room for that. He grabbed his jacket, nodded once to Maxwell behind the counter, who, surprisingly, just waved him off with a grunt, and followed Henry out the door. The street had darkened. Evening was already closing in, and the air was colder than it had been in the morning. Henry moved fast, faster than Jared expected, with a shaky urgency that made people turn as they passed. He didn't stop to rest, didn't ask where they were going. He just kept repeating the address under his breath like a chant, like saying it too many times might lock it in place before it slipped away again. It didn't take long for Jared to realize the address wasn't close. No way they'd make it walking before nightfall. So he made a choice. He pulled Henry toward the nearest bus stop, dropped a few crumpled bills into the fare slot, and guided him onto the bus. They didn't talk. Not really. Henry held the flyer like it was a lifeline, eyes locked on the street outside, body tensed like he was preparing for something big and wasn't sure how to brace himself. Jared sat next to him, watching, wondering, was this real? Was there really a family waiting? Would someone open that door, or would it all fall apart in front of them? The ride dragged. Each stop stretched too long. But finally, the driver called out a street that matched the flyer, and Henry stood before the bus, even fully stopped. Jared followed. They stepped onto a quiet street, lined with houses that looked like they'd been built from money. Lawns trimmed sharp, porches clean, cars too new. It felt like another world, a few miles from where Jared had come from, but decades apart. Henry froze halfway down the sidewalk. "That one," he said. Jared followed his gaze, a two-story white house with black shutters and a porch light flickering on with the dusk. "That's my home." Henry didn't wait for Jared to ask. He moved, quick and unsteady, up the walk, up the steps, until he stood in front of the door. His hand hovered above the bell. Not shaking, not uncertain, just holding the moment still, like it might break if he pushed too fast. Then he pressed it. The chime echoed behind the door. Jared's chest tightened. He didn't know what would happen. He didn't know what he was hoping for. Then footsteps. The door opened. A man stood there, maybe early 30s, tall, sharp suit, tie loose like he'd just come home from work. His eyes landed on Henry, and everything fell out of his face. "Dad?" The word broke the silence like a dropped plate. Henry stumbled back a step. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. "William," he breathed. Jared didn't need to hear the rest. He didn't need to know the backstory or the reasons. He saw enough in that single word to understand. Henry hadn't just remembered a place. He'd remembered his son. William stepped forward and caught him before he could fall. Jared turned away, not out of shame but respect. This wasn't his moment. He didn't belong in the middle of it. Henry sobbed, not loud, not dramatic, just deep, shaking grief and relief pouring out at once. William held him like someone who had waited months, years maybe, for a ghost to walk through the door again. Jared stood at the edge of the porch, watching as a family that had been ripped apart began stitching itself back together in front of him. Eventually, Henry looked up. "I don't remember everything," he said. William nodded. "That's okay, you're home." That was all they needed. Jared stepped back onto the sidewalk. He didn't wait to be thanked. He didn't linger. He just started walking, heart light, breath even. He'd done what he could. He'd brought someone home. That was enough. Jared didn't look back as he walked down the quiet street. Behind him, father and son were still wrapped in something too personal to witness. He didn't belong there. Not really. He had done what he could, and now it was time to go. The air felt lighter on the walk home, like something in his chest had finally let go. The flyer was still in his pocket, damp at the corners, but he didn't need it anymore. Henry had a name, a family, a place. That piece of paper didn't carry the same weight it did before. He reached the apartment just as the streetlights blinked on. Inside, the smell of soup filled the air. His mom was at the stove, ladling dinner into bowls. She glanced up when he walked in. "You're late," she said. Jared dropped his bag on the couch and stretched his arms. "Yeah." She looked past him. "Where's Henry?" Jared paused, the weight of what had just happened still hanging over him. Then, with a smile that felt strange on his face, he said, "He found his way home." She didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. Instead, she nodded once, turned back to the stove, and set a bowl on the table. That night, they ate dinner in a kind of silence that didn't feel heavy. It felt earned. The soup was the same as always. The apartment looked the same, but something was different. Jared couldn't name it, not exactly. There was no stress hovering in the corners of the room, no tension lingering between the clatter of spoons. It felt peaceful. After dinner, Jared sat on the couch, not bothering with homework or chores. He let his eyes wander across the ceiling, the chipped paint, the shadows from the streetlights outside. For once, he didn't feel the usual pressure. No tightness in his chest, no dread about tomorrow. He closed his eyes and slept without counting the hours. The next morning started like every other. Alarm clock too early, cold air through the cracked window. Jared pulled on the same faded hoodie, grabbed his bag, and headed out. The diner was waiting. Maxwell didn't like late arrivals. When he stepped inside, everything looked exactly as it had the day before. The same clatter of dishes, the same smell of bacon and coffee, same customers at the counter, sipping from chipped mugs and reading newspapers like time had stood still. Jared got to work. He wiped tables, took orders, refilled coffees without being asked. It was the same rhythm, the same grind. But his mind kept drifting. Back to Henry. Back to the look on William's face. Back to that moment on the porch when everything cracked open and stitched itself together again. It should have felt like an ending, but it didn't. It felt like something had just begun. The rush came and went like usual. Jared was behind the counter, refilling sugar canisters when the bell above the door jingled. He looked up automatically and froze. Standing in the doorway, clean-shaven, hair combed neatly, wearing a pressed button-down shirt, was Henry. Jared blinked, not trusting what he was seeing. Henry looked nothing like the man who had shuffled through garbage 2 nights ago. Beside him stood William, now in a tailored suit that looked too expensive for this part of town. The two of them looked like they'd stepped out of a world that had nothing to do with greasy floors and diner booths. But it was them. Henry smiled first, not a weak, uncertain smile, but something steady, something full. Jared didn't move, couldn't. Henry crossed the room in a few slow steps, and without hesitation pulled Jared into a hug. Jared stiffened at first, caught off guard by the contact, unsure what to do with it. But Henry's grip wasn't performative, so it wasn't a thank you tossed out of politeness. It was quiet, firm, and full of something Jared hadn't expected. When Henry stepped back, there was something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Clarity. "You saved me," Henry said. "You didn't have to, but you did." Jared shrugged, unsure how to respond. "You followed me first." Henry chuckled softly, then turned toward William. "This is my son," he said with pride in his voice, like the words were fresh and sacred. "He wanted to meet you." William stepped forward and extended a hand. Jared shook it, feeling the kind of grip that meant more than words. "Not about strength, about sincerity. You didn't just help my father," William said. "You brought him back to us. I don't think there's anything I could say that would cover that, but we'd like to try." Jared opened his mouth, but nothing came out. He wasn't used to attention. He wasn't used to being seen. William continued, "We'd like to speak with your mother." That brought Jared back to earth. "My mom?" Henry nodded. "If she raised you, we owe her too." Jared didn't know what to say. He just nodded. The three of them walked back together. William's car, sleek and spotless, waited at the curb, drawing attention from everyone passing by. Jared climbed in, trying not to feel out of place in his old sneakers and secondhand jeans. The apartment hadn't changed. It was still small, still tired, still home. His mom was sitting at the kitchen table, flipping through unpaid bills when they walked in. She looked up, startled, and her eyes flicked from Jared to the two men behind him. Her expression shifted slowly, cautious, confused. Henry stepped forward. "You must be Sarah." She stood, unsure. William took over, his voice calm. "My name is William Thompson. Your son saved my father's life, and we came here to say thank you." She stared at him, unsure whether to believe what she was hearing. William looked around, at the chipped paint, the stack of notices, the flickering kitchen light, then back at her. "My company has an opening, full time. Benefits. We'd like to offer it to you. She froze. William looked at Jared. And we'd like to make sure he never has to worry about school again. No one said anything for a moment. Then Henry stepped forward and placed a hand on Jared's shoulder. You helped me find my way back, he said. Now let us do the same. Sarah didn't speak at first. She stood still, one hand resting on the edge of the kitchen table, her eyes moving slowly from William to Henry to her son. Jared didn't move either. He'd never seen his mother caught off guard. Not like this. She was the kind of woman who always had a comeback, always had her guard up, always had the bills arranged in neat piles, no matter how overdue they were. But now, something in her had gone still. You're offering me a job? She asked finally, her voice quiet, not suspicious, just tired. The kind of tired that didn't come from one hard week, but from years of pushing through. William nodded. Something stable, cleaning management at one of our properties, good pay, benefits, safe hours. Sarah glanced at Jared again, then looked back to William. Why? William paused. Because your son changed our lives. Her lips parted like she wanted to challenge that, but she didn't. She just nodded once, slowly, like someone trying to decide whether they were still dreaming. And him? She asked, her gaze shifting to Jared. What are you offering him? William didn't hesitate. College. Any school he wants. Full ride. No loans. No debt. No strings. Jared's mouth went dry. He hadn't thought that far ahead. He hadn't thought about college in weeks, maybe months. It had always been one of those things people talked about like a possibility, not a plan, not for people like him. Not when every week was a balancing act between rent and food and shifts at the diner. Sarah looked at him again, and for the first time in a long time, Jared couldn't tell what she was thinking. We'd like to help, William said. Not because we owe you, but because it's the right thing to do. Sarah exhaled slowly. Then she nodded once. No fuss, no breakdown, no big reaction, just the quiet acceptance of a woman who knew how rare these moments were and how quickly they could vanish. Henry stepped forward again. You took me in without asking who I was. You fed me, gave me a place to sleep. You didn't know me, but you didn't turn me away. Sarah finally smiled, not a wide one, just enough to show she understood. We don't have much, she said, but we don't turn our backs either. Henry nodded. That saved me. Jared stood near the door, still unsure whether any of this was real. He kept waiting for something to fall apart, for someone to say there had been a mistake. But nothing broke. Nothing crumbled. Instead, William reached into his coat pocket and handed Sarah a folder. She opened it. Job details, company contacts, onboarding paperwork. All legit. All real. I can start Monday, she said after a pause. William smiled. That's perfect. Then he turned back to Jared. If you want, I can connect you with a counselor next week. Someone who will walk you through the application process. No rush. No pressure. You just let us know when you're ready. Jared didn't answer right away. The thought of sitting in a classroom again, of picking a school, of imagining a future where money didn't choke every choice, none of it felt real. But he nodded. Okay, he said. Yeah, that'd be cool. William checked his watch. We won't keep you. I just wanted to come in person. He offered his hand again. Sarah shook it this time. So did Jared. Henry moved to the door with William, but before he left, he looked back at Jared and held his gaze. Thank you, he said again. Jared nodded. Take care of yourself. Henry smiled. Then he stepped outside, followed by his son. When the door closed, silence filled the apartment. Sarah sat back down at the kitchen table, the folder still open in front of her. Jared dropped onto the couch like his body had been holding tension for so long it didn't know how to be still. You believe that just happened? He asked. Sarah didn't answer. She just shook her head slowly, then reached for her cold coffee and took a sip like it might help her make sense of things. They didn't talk much that night. They didn't need to. There was a shift in the air, subtle but undeniable, like the future had cracked open a little and let some light in. Dinner was quiet, not solemn, just calm. Jared could feel it even in the way they moved around the kitchen, even in the rhythm of forks against plates. There was space to breathe for once. That night, Jared lay in bed thinking about everything. Henry's voice, the hug, the porch light, the flyer, the photo, the way William had looked at his father like he couldn't believe he was real, and how all of it started with one decision, to stop and say something instead of walking away. He didn't sleep for a while, but when he did, it was deep and undisturbed. No alarms in his chest, no weight on his shoulders, just sleep, the kind he hadn't felt in years. The next day started the way they always did. Jared got up early, pulled on the same hoodie, laced up the same beat-up sneakers, and headed out before the sun had fully climbed over the rooftops. The streets were still quiet, and the cold pressed into his sleeves like it always did. But something felt different. The weight he usually carried, worry, exhaustion, that low-level ache that never quite left him, was gone. He reached the diner before the morning rush and slid behind the counter like he'd done 100 times before. Maxwell was already barking orders in the back, and the usual customers had already taken their regular booths, coffee cups in hand. Jared moved through the space like muscle memory. Take orders, wipe down the bar, refill creamers, smile when necessary. He didn't think the day would bring anything new. But just as the early waves started to settle, the door chimed. He looked up and froze. Henry was standing in the doorway, but it wasn't the same man Jared had found behind the dumpster. This Henry was clean-shaven, wearing a crisp button-down shirt tucked neatly into slacks. His hair was combed back, revealing the faint scar along his temple. He looked rested, present, and beside him stood William, dressed in a tailored suit, sharp and confident, like he belonged on the cover of some business magazine. They both stepped inside, and for a moment the diner seemed to pause. Conversations dimmed. Coffee cups halted halfway to lips. Jared didn't move. He just stared. Henry walked toward him, steady, calm. When he reached the counter, he didn't wait. He wrapped his arms around Jared and held on. Jared stood there, stunned. Affection wasn't something he knew what to do with. It wasn't that he didn't want it. It just didn't show up in his life often. But this hug didn't feel forced. It felt like something honest, something necessary. When Henry pulled away, he looked Jared in the eye. "You saved me," he said. "You didn't have to, but you did. And you changed everything." Jared swallowed, not sure how to respond. He gave a half shrug, the only thing that made sense. "You followed me first," he said. Henry smiled, and for a moment it looked like he might laugh, but he didn't. He stepped aside and gestured toward William. "My son wanted to meet you properly." William reached out and shook Jared's hand. His grip was firm, steady, but it wasn't about strength. It was about meaning. "You didn't just help my father," William said. "You gave him back to me. For weeks, I didn't know if I'd ever see him again. And then we get a call from him, clear-headed, standing in front of our house. That doesn't happen without you." Jared nodded, still unsure where to put all the words being thrown at him. William continued, "We wanted to see you again, and thank your mother in person, if she's home." Jared blinked. "Right now?" Henry nodded. "If she raised you to be the kind of person who doesn't walk past someone in need, then yeah. We'd like to thank her." Jared hesitated. Part of him still didn't believe any of this was real, but the rest of him knew it was. So he grabbed his hoodie and waved to Maxwell, who gave a grunt and flicked a hand toward the door. They rode in William's car, black, polished, too quiet inside. Jared tried not to touch anything. He sat in the back seat, feeling like an extra in a movie he didn't audition for. When they pulled up to his apartment, the contrast hit hard. The chipped paint, the crooked number on the front door, the mail jammed into the rusted box. Jared opened the door and stepped inside. His mom was sitting at the kitchen table again, sorting bills into two piles. Maybe, and not this month. She looked up when he entered, brow creasing. Then she saw who was behind him. Henry stepped in first. William followed. She stood slowly, unsure whether to sit or stay on her feet. Henry smiled. "Sarah, right?" She nodded. William stepped forward and extended his hand. "I'm William. Your son saved my father's life, and we're here because we'd like to return the favor." She looked between the two of them, her eyes scanning Henry, then William, then back to Jared. William didn't rush. He let the moment settle before speaking again. "I run a company," he said. "We have an opening, something solid, good benefits, health coverage, pension. We'd like to offer it to you, if you're interested." Her hands dropped slowly to her sides. Her voice was low. "You serious?" William smiled. "Completely." Then he turned toward Jared. "And we'd like to make sure this one doesn't have to worry about school. Not anymore. Tuition, books, everything." Sarah looked at Jared. He looked back. For a second, neither of them spoke. Then she let out a breath. I don't know what to say. Henry stepped closer. You don't have to say anything. You opened your door when you didn't have to. You gave me something I'd lost, humanity. Sarah picked up the job offer William placed on the table. She glanced at the numbers, the name of the company, the signature at the bottom. I'll be there Monday, she said. William nodded. We'll be ready. They didn't stay long. Henry hugged Jared again at the door. William shook Sarah's hand once more, firm and warm. Then they left. When the door closed, Jared just stood there. His mom turned to him. You okay? He nodded. Yeah. She walked back to the table, sat down, and started sorting the bills again. But this time she moved one of the envelopes from the not this month pile to the maybe. And for the first time in a long time, Jared let himself hope. The next few days passed with a strange, quiet rhythm Jared wasn't used to. Nothing about his world had changed on the surface. Same apartment, same streets, same shifts at the diner. But everything underneath had shifted. It was in the way his mother moved through the apartment, straighter somehow. Like the weight she carried had been adjusted, not removed, but lightened. It was in the way Jared caught himself thinking about college without immediately shutting the door in his mind. He still woke up early, still worked his shifts, still nodded to the same tired customers and wiped the same tables. But he wasn't just passing time anymore. There was a future waiting. For the first time, it didn't feel like a joke to believe in it. On Thursday, just after the lunch rush, the bell above the diner door rang again. Jared looked up from behind the counter, expecting a regular. Instead, Henry walked in. He wasn't alone. Behind him stood William, dressed down in a simple sweater and jeans, and beside them, Jared had to blink, were two women and a young boy. One of the women had her arm linked through Henry's. The other was carrying a paper bag full of something homemade. The boy stared around the diner with wide eyes, clearly unimpressed. Jared came around the counter slowly, unsure whether to smile or panic. Henry caught his hesitation. You're not in trouble, he said, grinning. We're just visiting. Jared nodded, his heart slowing. This is my daughter, Henry said, motioning to the woman at his side. And this is my grandson. The bossy one is my daughter-in-law. The daughter-in-law laughed. He means me. William stepped forward, shaking Jared's hand like it was routine now. We had lunch with the family and told them about what happened. They insisted on meeting you. And, he glanced at the bag the woman carried. We might have brought a little something. The woman handed it to Jared, still warm from the oven, banana bread, wrapped in wax paper tied with a piece of twine. Jared blinked. You didn't have to. We know, the daughter said. That's why we wanted to. Jared held the bag awkwardly, unsure where to put it, unsure how to react. Henry looked around. This place saved me. Jared shook his head. You saved yourself. Henry smiled again. That may be true, but I couldn't have done it without someone stopping long enough to care. They stayed for a while, not long enough to interrupt the day, but long enough to change it. Henry sat in a booth, talking with a few regulars who recognized him now. One woman even cried. Maxwell came out from the back, muttered something about blocking the walkway, but didn't ask them to leave. Eventually, the family stood, made their goodbyes, and stepped back into the late afternoon light. Henry lingered a second longer. He turned to Jared and said, You remember what it felt like when you saw me out there in the alley? Jared nodded. Don't lose that, Henry said. This world's too fast, too loud, it forgets people, but you didn't. He didn't wait for an answer. He just stepped out, letting the door swing shut behind him. That night, Jared walked home from work with the banana bread still in his bag. He didn't tell his mom what happened. He didn't need to. She saw his face when he walked in and raised an eyebrow, but didn't press. She was sitting at the table with her new work badge clipped to her shirt. It was just a plastic card, cheap laminate, but Jared saw how often she looked at it. They ate dinner without the wait. No tension. No half-spoken fears. Jared didn't even think about checking the empty spots in the fridge or the bills near the microwave. Later, he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, that same cracked spot above his head that had always made him feel trapped. But now it didn't feel like a ceiling. It felt like something he might push past. In the weeks that followed, Sarah started her job. She came home tired, but it was a different kind of tired, earned, not drained. Jared met with the counselor William arranged. At first, he felt like a fraud sitting in that office, talking about applications and majors and transcripts that looked worse than he wanted. But the woman didn't judge. She just helped him map a way forward. Maxwell started assigning him more hours, not out of punishment, but trust. Jared worked hard, always had. But now people noticed. Sometimes, when the diner slowed down, Jared would glance out the back door and remember the night it all started. The way Henry had looked, curled beside the dumpster like the world had spat him out and kept going. How close Jared had come to walking past. And he would wonder what would have happened if he had. He never found the answer. But he knew one thing for certain. In a city that taught people to keep their heads down, Jared had looked up. And because he did, a man found his way home. A son got his father back. A family was rebuilt. And a door that had never seemed open before creaked forward, just enough for someone like Jared to see a life beyond the limits he'd accepted. Kindness, he realized, wasn't about having enough to give. It was about seeing someone when the world told you not to. It didn't take much, just a meal, a question, a moment. But it changed everything. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to today's story. We're truly grateful for your presence and your open heart. This wasn't just a story. It was a reminder that even the smallest act of kindness can change someone's life. Sometimes it only takes a meal, a moment, or a decision to look a little closer. In a world that often moves too fast to notice, choosing to care can be the most powerful thing we do. If this story touched you in any way, we'd love your support. Just click the like button. It means more than you know. Leave a comment below to let us know where you're watching from and how the story made you feel. Your voice matters here. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel. It helps us continue to bring you meaningful, heart-driven stories like this one. Your support helps us grow this community of empathy and connection, one story at a time. Thank you again for being here. We'll see you in the next one.